Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was in the CW Flash show and became Max Steel. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was screaming, not with voices, but with the tortured shriek of physics being torn asunder. The air, once filled with the familiar sounds of battle, explosions, the clang of metal, the determined shouts of heroes in training, was now a discordant symphony of impossible noises. The scrape of concrete folding in on itself, the wet pop of gravity inverting, the high-pitched whine of light bending where it should be straight. Izuku Midoriya, known to the world as the hero Deku, felt it all in his bones. The green lightning of One for All crackled around him, a furious storm trying to anchor him to a reality that was actively rejecting its own rules. His costume, the gamma suit he designed with Meihatsum, was caked in dust and singed at the edges. His body ached with a familiar, deep-seated pain that was the constant companion of his borrowed power. Across the ruined plaza, the source of the chaos grinned. The villain called himself Distortion, a man whose quirk was less a power and more a fundamental disagreement with existence. He wasn't creating portals or illusions. He was grabbing swaths of reality and twisting them like wet cloth. A skyscraper across the street now resembled a corkscrew, its windows spiraling into the sky. A fountain in the center of the plaza flowed upwards, its water turning to jagged crystal at the apex before raining down like glass shrapnel. "Come on, little heroes!" Distortion cackled, his voice echoing from 3 places at once. "Can't you keep up? The world is so much more interesting when you ignore the rules." To his right, Shoto Todoroki sent a massive glacier roaring towards the villain, but it fractured halfway, its trajectory splitting into a dozen different directions, some shards shooting straight up, others turning to steam. To his left, Tenya Ida attempted a reciprocal burst, only for the ground beneath him to lose all friction, sending him skidding uncontrollably into the warped remains of a bus. They were being systematically dismantled. Every attack, every strategy, was rendered moot by a foe who could simply decide the attack would happen somewhere else. Deku's mind raced, a frantic torrent of analysis and desperation. He's not teleporting us, he's moving the space we occupy. It's localized reality warping. There's a tell, there has to be a tell. A shimmer? A sound? His eyes, glowing with the emerald fire of his quirk, scanned the battlefield. He saw it then. A subtle, oily ripple in the air just before a warp occurred, like heat haze on asphalt. And it always originated from the villain's hands. He wasn't warping the entire area at once. He was painting the chaos, stroke by stroke. "Uraraka-san!" Deku yelled, his voice cutting through the din. On his left. "He's overextending." Achiko Uraraka, her face set with grim determination, was already in motion. She had been using her zero-gravity on debris, creating a minefield of floating obstacles that Distortion had to navigate. Tapping a floating chunk of rebar, she launched herself towards the villain's flank, her fingers outstretched. "I see it." She was fast, agile, and she had the element of surprise. But as her fingers came within inches of Distortion's coat, the villain just chuckled. Too slow. The air around Uraraka rippled. For a horrifying instant, she was stretched, her form elongating like taffy. Then, with a sickening snap, the space she occupied folded. She wasn't teleported. She was simply encased. A perfect cube of folded space, no bigger than a filing cabinet, now hovered where she had been. It was seamless, shimmering faintly, and within it, Deku could see a distorted, frozen image of her terrified face. "Achiko!" Ida screamed, his engine sputtering as he tried to find purchase. A cold, primal terror washed over Deku, colder than any of Todoroki's ice. It was a terror that momentarily silenced the roaring chorus of One for All in his soul. Distortion laughed, a genuinely delighted sound that made Deku's blood run cold. "Ah, the Schrodinger's hero," the villain mused, tapping the cube with a gloved finger. "Is she alive? Is she dead? Is she smeared across 1,000 different dimensions inside this little box? Who knows? The only way to find out is to open it. And if I do that, the spatial pressure will equalize." Pop. He made a small exploding gesture with his fingers. "Messy." Deku felt the vestiges of One for All stir within him. A symphony of voices, of wills, rose up not in anger, but in a focused, burning resolve. The boy is right, Nana Shimura's voice seemed to whisper in the back of his mind. He can't maintain all these warps at once. The prison is his focus. That is the weak point. He knew what he had to do. It was the same terrible, glorious calculus he always arrived at. The cost measured against the life. And the cost was always worth it. Everyone, get back! He roared, planting his iron-soled boots firmly on a rare patch of stable ground. Green lightning exploded from him, no longer just crackling but sheeting off his body in violent, uncontrolled arcs. The ground beneath his feet spiderwebbed with cracks. One for all. Full cowling. 100%. The power was blinding. It was agony. It felt like every cell in his body was a miniature sun-going supernova. The ghosts of the past wielders roared their approval, their power flowing into him, a tidal wave of heroic legacy. He could feel his bones groaning under the strain, the muscles in his legs and back threatening to tear themselves from their anchors. But in the eye of that hurricane of power, his mind was crystal clear. The target wasn't distortion. The target was the prison. The quirk itself. He couldn't just punch the box. That would be like punching water. He had to hit it with a force so overwhelming, so singular in its purpose, that it would shatter not just the object, but the very laws of physics holding it together. He had to punch a hole in reality. What are you doing, you little fool? Distortion sneered, his confidence faltering for the first time as the sheer pressure emanating from Deku made the air tremble. You'll kill her! No, Deku grunted, the word torn from his throat. The green energy condensed, swirling around his right leg until it glowed with the intensity of a dying star. I'm going to save her, he pushed off. The sound barrier was an afterthought, a triviality he shattered without notice. For a microsecond, he was no longer a boy. He was a projectile, a living bullet forged from the hopes and dreams of 8 generations of heroes. St. Louis. Smash! His leg connected with the shimmering cube, and the world broke. There was no sound. There was no explosion, not in the conventional sense. There was only a deafening, soul-crushing silence as two impossible forces met. The pure, kinetic energy of One for All, a power that represented order, legacy, and the simple physics of A to B, crashed against a quirk that was the very essence of chaos and entropy. A pinpoint of absolute blackness appeared at the point of impact. Then it erupted. A wave of purple and green light tore through the plaza. Deku felt a sensation he couldn't name. It was like being pulled in every direction at once. His body, already strained to its absolute limit by 100%, was now being unraveled, thread by thread. The roaring voices of the vestiges screamed and then, one by one, went silent, like candles being snuffed out in a gale. The last thing he saw was the cube shattering, and Uraraka, whole and safe, tumbling out into Ida's arms. The last thing he felt was the comforting warmth of One for All, his sacred inheritance, being ripped away from him. Then, there was only the silent, screaming void. And then, nothing at all. Cold. That was the first sensation. A damp, biting cold that seeped through the tattered remains of his costume, and chilled him to the bone. The second was pain. Not the sharp, incandescent agony of One for All at 100%, but a dull, throbbing, comprehensive misery. His right arm felt like a bag of shattered glass. His ribs protested every shallow breath. His head pounded with a rhythm that felt like someone was trying to tenderize his brain with a meat mallet. The third was the smell. A putrid cocktail of rotting food, stagnant water, and something vaguely chemical. It was the smell of decay, of forgotten things. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. He was met with a sliver of bruised, twilight sky, framed by the rusted metal lip of a dumpster. Rain, thin and miserable, pattered against his face. He was lying on a pile of sodden cardboard and leaking plastic bags. He pushed himself up with his left arm, a groan tearing from his raw throat. Every muscle screamed in protest. He managed to swing his legs over the side of the dumpster and tumbled out, landing unceremoniously on his hands and knees in a grimy alley. The impact sent a fresh wave of agony through his broken arm, and he bit back a cry, tears welling in his eyes. Where am I? He looked around. The alley was dark, flanked by brick buildings that were streaked with grime. A single flickering bulb above a metal door cast a sickly yellow glow. The air was thick with the smell of rain and exhaust fumes. He could hear the distant wail of sirens, but they sounded wrong. The pitch was higher, the rhythm unfamiliar. The fight. Distortion. Uraraka-san! Panic, sharp and cold, cut through the fog of pain. He lurched to his feet, swaying unsteadily. Uraraka-san! Ida-kun! Todoroki-kun! His voice was a weak croak, swallowed by the oppressive dampness of the alley. The only answer was the drumming of the rain on a metal fire escape. He stumbled towards the mouth of the alley, his bare feet, the iron soles of his boots having been torn off in the blast, protesting the gritty, cold asphalt. He emerged onto a street. And his world tilted on its axis once more. The buildings were too tall, all gleaming glass and steel that scraped a sky already choked with light pollution. The cars were different, their shapes sleek and foreign. And the signs were the worst part. Bright, garish neon signs advertising products he didn't recognize, written in a language he knew, but shouldn't be seeing everywhere. English. Billboards, street signs, the name on the side of a passing bus, all in English. He saw a newspaper stand, a discarded paper lying on the wet ground. The mast had read Central City Citizen. Central City? The name meant nothing to him. It wasn't a city in Japan. It wasn't a city he had ever heard of. He staggered over to the paper, his heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against his broken ribs. The date read October 12th, 2014. The year was wrong. Everything was wrong. This wasn't Nizudafu. This wasn't even Japan. The full weight of his situation crashed down on him. The explosion. The clash between his quirk and distortions. It hadn't just thrown him across the city. It had thrown him somewhere else. A different world. No. He whispered, the word a plume of white in the cold air. No, no, no. He reached for it then. A desperate, instinctual gesture. He reached inside himself for the familiar, comforting inferno of One for All. He closed his eyes, searching for the crackling energy, the chorus of the vestiges, the boundless strength that had become as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. He found nothing. There was only a hollow, cavernous emptiness. A void. The place where a sun had once burned was now a pit of cold ash. The link he shared with All Might, with Nana Shimura, with every hero who had come before him, was severed. The power was gone. The panic turned to pure, undiluted terror. He wasn't just lost. He was powerless. He was a quirkless, broken boy in a foreign land with no one to call, no way home, and a body that felt like it was on the verge of complete collapse. He backed away from the street, stumbling back into the relative darkness of the alley. He slid down the rough brick wall, heedless of the way it scraped his battered back. He pulled his knees to his chest and buried his face in them, his body shaking with silent, racking sobs. He had failed. He had been entrusted with the world's greatest power, a sacred torch passed down through generations, and he had lost it. All Might's smile, his mother's worried face, his friends' determined shouts, they were all gone, on the other side of an impossible chasm. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone. He didn't know how long he sat there, lost in a fog of pain and despair. It could have been minutes or hours. The rain began to fall harder, plastering his green hair to his forehead, the cold seeping deeper into his bones. His adrenaline was gone, leaving only a profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. He was so tired. It would be so easy to just close his eyes, to let the cold take him. Crack! A sound like a thunderclap, sharp and close, snapped him out of his stupor. It was followed by the shattering of glass and a woman's scream. Izuku's head shot up. His breath hitched. The sounds came from the street he'd just retreated from. The hero in him, the part that had been forged in the fires of the sludge villain incident, the part that All Might had seen and chosen, stirred. It was a faint ember in the vast, cold emptiness where One for All used to be, but it was there. And it was stubborn. You can't, a part of his mind, the logical, terrified part, reasoned with him. You're hurt. You have no power. You'll die. But then he heard a child cry, and the argument was over. Pushing himself up the wall, his body screaming in protest, Izuku staggered back towards the mouth of the alley. He peered around the corner, his eyes widening at the scene before him. A man was standing in front of a smashed ATM, bags of money at his feet. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the miniature, localized storm clouds swirling around his head. A dark, angry nimbus of gray cloud that crackled with tiny bolts of lightning and pelted the area around him with marble-sized hail. Gusts of wind erupted from him, knocking over trash cans and forcing pedestrians to cling to lamp posts. A quirk? Izuku thought, his analytical mind kicking in despite everything. No, the energy feels different. More chaotic. Unstable. He seems to be generating a localized weather phenomenon. He controls the wind and precipitation, but it seems tied to his emotional state. He's yelling, angry, and the storm is getting worse. A mother and her young son were pinned behind a car, the hail clattering against the metal just inches from their heads. The woman was trying to shield the boy, her face pale with terror. The police were cordoning off the street, but they couldn't get close. Every time they tried, a blast of wind would shove them back. Deku's heart ached. He was useless. What could he do? He couldn't smash the man. He couldn't leap to the rescue. He was just Izuku Midoriya, a boy with a broken arm and a hero's heart that was currently more of a liability than an asset. He looked around, his gaze frantic. His eyes landed on a row of metal trash cans and their heavy, circular lids. He saw a construction site down the block, with scaffolding and loose tarps. He saw the storm-wielding man, focused entirely on the police in front of him, his back and sides completely exposed. A distraction, the ember of heroism in his chest flared brighter. I can't fight him. But I can give them an opening to escape. The plan was reckless. It was stupid. It was probably going to get him killed. It was perfect. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he crept from the alley, staying low. He grabbed one of the heavy trash can lids, the metal biting into his trembling fingers. It felt impossibly heavy without his power. He hefted it, using it as a makeshift shield. He took a deep breath, the cold, rain-soaked air burning his lungs. You don't need a quirk to save someone. Then he ran. His legs, devoid of one-for-all's power, felt like lead. Every step sent a jolt of agony through his body. He wasn't a blur of green lightning anymore. He was just a boy, hobbling across the pavement, holding a piece of trash like a knight's shield. The man, who Izuku mentally dubbed Nimbus, heard the clumsy clatter of his footsteps and turned. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. Get lost, kid! This ain't your business. He thrust a hand out, and a furious gust of wind slammed into Deku. The force was staggering. It threw him back several feet, and he landed hard on his side. The trash can lid flew from his grasp and clattered across the street. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment the world swam in a haze of black spots. Get up, he commanded himself. Get up! He saw Nimbus turn his attention back to the ATM. That was his chance. Pushing himself to his knees, Deku grabbed a handful of loose gravel from a pothole. His aim was true, born from countless hours of training. He flung the gravel not at the man, but at the plate glass window of the shop next to him. Crash! The window shattered. The sound was loud, jarring. Nimbus spun around, startled. What the? It was the only opening Deku needed. He surged to his feet and charged, not at the man, but past him, towards the mother and child. Go! He yelled, the English word feeling clumsy on his tongue. He pointed down the street, away from the chaos. Now! Run! The woman stared at him for a half-second, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion at this tattered, green-haired boy. But the urgency in his voice was a universal language. She scooped up her son and ran. Nimbus roared in fury, realizing he'd been tricked. You little pest! A bolt of lightning, thicker than Deku's arm, lanced from the cloud above his head. It wasn't aimed at Deku, but at the fleeing family. There was no time to think. No time for a plan. There was only instinct. Deku threw himself sideways, putting his own broken body in the path of the attack. He braced for an agony beyond anything he had ever known. He expected to be burned, to be stopped, to be ended. He never felt it. What he felt was a sudden gust of wind, not from the villain, but from behind him. A rush of displaced air so powerful it was like a physical blow. The world seemed to stutter, to slow down. He saw the bolt of lightning, crackling and white-hot, suddenly veer off course as if slapped aside by an invisible hand. It struck the side of a building, blasting a hole in the brickwork. A blur of red and gold lightning streaked past him. It was here and gone in less time than a heartbeat. In its wake, Nimbus was suddenly on the ground, his arms and legs bound by a thick set of metallic-looking cuffs that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. The storm cloud above his head dissipated with a pathetic puff of gray smoke. The street fell silent, save for the patter of the rain and the distant, now approaching sirens. Deku stood there, swaying, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He looked down the street. The mother and child were safe, half a block away. He looked at the neutralized villain. He looked at the smoldering crater in the building. Then, the red blur was back, resolving itself into the form of a man. He was wearing a sleek, crimson suit, accented with gold lines that looked like stylized lightning bolts. A symbol, a single yellow bolt in a white circle, was emblazoned on his chest. His face was covered by a cowl, but his jaw was firm, his expression one of deep concern. "Hey, you okay?" the man asked, his voice slightly distorted by the cowl. He took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. That was incredibly reckless. And incredibly brave. "You're hurt." Deku just stared. A hero. This world had heroes. A hero with a speed quirk, it seemed. One so fast he made Ida's recipro burst look like a casual jog. The adrenaline that had fueled his mad dash, the desperate energy that had kept him on his feet, finally gave out. The pain, which had been a roaring bonfire, became an all-consuming inferno. The world began to tilt and spin. The edges of his vision went dark. "Whoa, easy there," the man in red said, his voice suddenly filled with alarm. He moved faster than Deku's eyes could track, and suddenly a strong arm was around his shoulders, keeping him from collapsing. Deku looked up into the hero's masked face. The man was speaking again, but the words were becoming a meaningless soup of sound. The language barrier, his exhaustion, his injuries, it was all too much. He tried to speak, to ask where he was, who this hero was, but only a garbled mix of Japanese and a pained groan came out. "It's okay, kid. I've got you," the red hero said, his tone gentle. He looked down at Deku's tattered costume, the strange design, the severe injuries that clearly weren't from this fight. He looked at the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion in the boy's eyes. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he couldn't just hand this kid over to the paramedics. There were too many questions. The last thing Izuku Midoriya saw before the world finally faded to black was the lightning bolt emblem on the man's chest. It was a symbol he didn't recognize, for a hero he didn't know, in a world that wasn't his. It was the symbol of his impossible, terrifying new reality. Barry Allen, the Flash, looked down at the unconscious boy in his arms. He was just a kid, probably no older than 16, and he was a mess of contradictions. He was grievously injured but had thrown himself in front of a lightning bolt. He was dressed in some kind of advanced tech costume but was barefoot in an alley. He had acted like a seasoned hero but looked like a lost, terrified child. With a sigh, Barry adjusted his grip, lifting the boy effortlessly. The police were arriving, and they could handle Nimbus. This was something else. This was a job for SDR Labs. "All right, kid," he murmured, more to himself than to the boy. "Let's get you somewhere safe. And then maybe you can tell me what in the world is going on." With a crackle of static and a gust of wind, the alley was empty once more. The unforeseen variable had been collected. His journey in this new, strange world was only just beginning. The first thing to penetrate the thick, suffocating fog of unconsciousness was a sound. A steady, rhythmic beeping, as metronomic and indifferent as a clock's tick. It was a clean sound, sterile, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of battle and the damp squalor of the alley that were his last waking memories. The second was the smell. Antiseptic. It was the scent of hospitals, of recovery rooms, a smell Izuku Midoriya knew with an unfortunate intimacy. It scraped at his nostrils, pulling him further towards the surface of awareness. The third was a feeling of profound, almost unnerving comfort. He was lying on something soft, a mattress that yielded perfectly to the contours of his battered body. A thin, warm blanket was draped over him. He could feel the slight, painless tug of an *4 needle in the back of his left hand. The broken bones in his right arm were immobilized, encased in something hard and smooth, a cast, he presumed. The screaming agony that had been his constant companion was now a dull, manageable throb, a distant echo of its former self. His eyelids, heavy as lead shutters, fluttered open. The light was dim, soft, and indirect. He wasn't in a hospital room. He was in a workshop? A laboratory? The ceiling was high, industrial, with exposed pipes and conduits. He was on a medical cot in the center of a vast, circular room filled with computers, holographic displays, and complex machinery he couldn't begin to identify. A whiteboard on one wall was a chaotic tapestry of equations and diagrams that made his head spin. A figure moved into his field of vision. A woman with kind, intelligent eyes and long brown hair. She wore a simple sweater and a look of professional concern. She offered him a small, gentle smile. "Hey there. Easy now," she said, her voice soft and calming. "You're safe. You're at SDR Labs." Izuku stared at her, his mind struggling to catch up. English. She was speaking English. He understood the words. He'd studied the language in school, of course, but the fluency and speed were disorienting. His brain felt like a rusty engine trying to turn over. SDR Labs? He managed to croak, his throat raw and dry. The words felt foreign and clumsy on his tongue. The woman's smile widened slightly. "You can understand me. That's good." She held up a small cup of water with a straw. "My name is Dr. Caitlin Snow. Can you tell me your name?" He took a tentative sip of the water. It was the most wonderful thing he had ever tasted. "Izuku," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "Midoriya Izuku." Before Caitlin could respond, two more figures entered the room, their footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. One was the man from the alley, the hero in red, now dressed in a simple red t-shirt and jeans. His face was open and friendly, his expression etched with a mixture of relief and intense curiosity. The other was a younger man with long, dark hair, a graphic tee, and an infectious, high-energy vibe. He was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. "He's awake!" "Awesome!" the man in the graphic tee exclaimed, skidding to a halt beside the cot. "Dude, your costume is insane. It's made of some kind of nanofiber polymer I've never seen before. It's got a tensile strength that's off the charts. I had to use a laser cutter just to get a sample." "Where did you get it? Is it from Japan? I hear they're like 30 years ahead of us in wearable tech." "Cisco, give him a chance to breathe," the red-shirt man said, placing a calming hand on his friend's shoulder. He turned his attention to Izuku. "I'm Barry Allen. I'm the one who brought you here. We were worried." Izuku's eyes flickered between the three of them. Caitlin, the doctor. Cisco, the engineer. And Barry, the hero. The Flash, he remembered the name from a quick glance at the newspaper. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. He tried to sit up, a surge of panic making his heart race. He needed to understand. He needed to find a way home. "Easy, Izuku," Caitlin said, gently pushing him back down. "You've been through a lot. You had a compound fracture in your right radius and ulna, 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, and you were suffering from extreme exhaustion and dehydration. You need to rest." The clinical litany of his injuries barely registered. His focus was singular, desperate. He closed his eyes, ignoring the concerned faces around him, and reached inward. He searched for the familiar, comforting blaze of One for All, praying that it had just been dormant, that rest had rekindled the flame. He found nothing. The void was still there. Cold, absolute, and terrifying. It wasn't just empty, it felt like a wound in his soul, a phantom limb that ached with its own absence. The power that had defined him, the legacy he had sworn to uphold, was gone. A choked, desperate sound escaped his lips, a sound of pure loss. Hey, what is it? Are you in pain?" Barry asked, his voice sharp with concern. Izuku shook his head, tears blurring his vision. How could he explain? How could he tell them that he had lost something infinitely more precious than a limb? That he had failed 8 generations of heroes? He couldn't. He didn't have the words, in any language. Where am I? He asked again, his voice trembling. Central City. America? Cisco nodded enthusiastically. The one and only. Home of Jitter's Coffee and your friendly neighborhood speedster. He gestured with a thumb at a proud-looking Barry. The confirmation was a physical blow. It solidified the impossible truth he had been trying to deny. He wasn't just in another city. He was on the other side of the planet, in a different country, a world away from everything he had ever known. I need to go home, he whispered, the words small and fragile. My mom, my friends, they'll be worried. The 3 of them exchanged a look, a complicated glance of pity and confusion. We want to help you with that, Barry said gently. But we don't know anything about you. You just appeared. That suit, your injuries, they don't match anything from the attack last night. It's like you fell out of the sky. Can you tell us what happened? Izuku opened his mouth to try and explain, but where would he even begin? I come from a world where 80% of the population has superpowers called quirks. I inherited the greatest of all quirks from the number 1 hero, All Might, and during a fight with a villain who warps reality, I punched a hole in the universe and ended up in your dumpster. They would think he was insane. They would lock him in a padded room. He was saved from having to answer by the smooth, almost silent whir of a wheelchair. A 4th person entered the main area of the cortex, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. He was an older man with sharp, intelligent features, framed by brown hair and glasses. He navigated his wheelchair with an effortless precision, his gaze fixed on Izuku. It was a gaze so intense, so analytical, it felt like it was peeling back layers of his skin to examine the machinery beneath. He is awake. Good, the man said, his voice a calm, measured baritone. The subject's resilience is remarkable. His cellular structure shows evidence of having contained and processed immense amounts of kinetic energy, far beyond normal human limits. Fascinating. He's a person, Dr. Wells, not a subject, Caitlin chided gently, though her tone lacked any real heat. Dr. Harrison Wells. The name on the side of the building. The man who started it all. Izuku felt an instinctive prickle of unease. There was something in the man's eyes, a cold, calculating curiosity that was devoid of the warmth he saw in the others. It reminded him, just for a fleeting moment, of the clinical gaze of a scientist he'd once met who specialized in quirk theory, a man who saw people not as individuals, but as fascinating collections of biological data. Of course, Dr. Snow, Wells said, his lips forming a thin, unconvincing smile. He addressed Izuku directly. Young man, my name is Dr. Harrison Wells. This facility, these people, we are dedicated to helping those affected by the unique circumstances that have arisen in our city. People like Barry. People with extraordinary abilities. We believe you may be one of them. Before Izuku could process the loaded statement, a klaxon began to blare. It was a jarring, ear-splitting sound that pulsed through the lab. Red lights flashed, bathing the cortex in a hellish crimson glow. What is that? Barry yelled over the alarm. Cisco was already at his console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A schematic of the sprawling SDR Labs facility appeared on the main monitor. A section deep in the sublevels was flashing a critical warning symbol. Oh no. No, Cisco muttered, his face draining of color. It's the TRBO vault. Sublevel 7. The containment field is fluctuating. What's the TRBO vault? Barry asked, already pulling on the ring that held his suit. Tachyon Unlimited Radiant Biooptimizer, Wells answered, his voice unnervingly calm amidst the chaos. He wheeled himself towards the main console, his eyes fixed on the rapidly changing readouts. A project the real Dr. Wells was working on before the accelerator explosion. An attempt to create a self-replicating, symbiotic energy source. He believed it could cure any degenerative disease, power a city for a century. I mothballed it. The energy was too volatile, too sentient. The power surges from the storm last night must have overloaded the secondary generators. Cisco shouted. The field's integrity is at 12% and dropping. If that thing gets out, it won't just level the building, Wells finished grimly. The energy will seek the nearest organic host to stabilize itself. The bonding process would be explosive. It would vaporize half of Central City. Izuku watched them, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't understand all the technical jargon, but he understood the panic. He understood the stakes. A part of him, the broken, quirkless part, wanted to curl up and hide. But the hero, the small, stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished, pushed him upright. He swung his legs off the cot, his bare feet hitting the cold floor. "Whoa, where do you think you're going?" Caitlin said, rushing to his side. "I can help," Izuku said, the words coming out with a desperate conviction. Barry, now fully suited as the Flash, shook his head. "No way. You're in no condition. Stay here. We'll handle this." He turned to Cisco. "Can you vent the energy?" "I can try," Cisco said, grabbing a large, heavy-looking tablet from a charging station. "But I have to get down there and manually engage the release valves. The remote system is fried." "I'll get you there," Flash said. He grabbed Cisco and, in a blur of red lightning, they were gone. Izuku, Caitlin, and Wells were left in the crimson-lit cortex, the wail of the alarm their only companion. The schematic on the screen showed the containment field integrity dropping. 9%. 8%. "They won't make it in time," Wells stated, his tone one of flat, factual observation. "Don't say that," Caitlin snapped, her eyes glued to the monitor. Izuku felt a terrible, familiar helplessness. It was the same feeling he'd had watching Bakugo struggle against the sludge villain, the same feeling that had driven him to run forward when all the pro-heroes stood back. He was powerless, yes, but he wasn't useless. He started to move towards the elevator, his body aching with every step. "And where are you going?" Wells asked, willing to block his path. "To help," Izuku repeated, his jaws set. I can distract it. Or do something." Wells actually chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "With what? Your reckless courage? Son, you are a fascinating anomaly, but in your current state, you would be nothing but a casualty." Suddenly, Barry and Cisco were back, reappearing in a gust of wind and crackling static. Cisco looked pale and shaken. "The primary valve is fused shut," he gasped, leaning against his console for support. "The heat is too intense. Barry can't get close enough to phase through it without risking igniting the whole chamber." The monitor let out a long, final beep. Containment field failure. The floor beneath them trembled violently. A deep, resonant hum vibrated up through the soles of Izuku's feet. From the elevator shaft, a light began to glow. A brilliant, sapphire-blue light that pulsed like a giant heartbeat. "It's breached the primary containment," Wells said, his voice still betraying no hint of fear. "It's coming." The elevator doors at the far end of the cortex groaned, the metal beginning to buckle outwards. The blue light intensified, pouring through the cracks. "Everyone back!" Barry yelled, pushing Caitlin behind him. Cisco was still by his console, frantically trying to activate the emergency blast shields. Come on, you piece of junk!" he pleaded with the machine. With a deafening shriek of tearing metal, the elevator doors were blasted off their hinges, flying across the room like shrapnel. They embedded themselves in the far wall with a thunderous crump. From the now open shaft poured not an explosion, but a wave. A silent, terrifying wave of pure, liquid energy. It was a mesmerizing, beautiful shade of blue, shot through with filaments of white light. It moved with an unnatural intelligence, flowing across the floor, consuming nothing, but radiating an immense power that made the air itself thrum. It coiled, like a serpent made of starlight, and then it struck. It wasn't aiming for Barry, the powerhouse. It wasn't aiming for Wells or Caitlin at the back of the room. It was aiming for the closest, most viable piece of organic technology it could sense, Cisco Ramon, whose hands were still resting on a live, powered console. "Cisco!" Barry screamed, but even he wasn't fast enough to cross the room before the energy reached his friend. Time seemed to slow down for Izuku. He saw the arc of blue energy, a death sentence flying through the air. He saw Cisco, frozen in place, his face a mask of pure terror. He saw Barry, a blur of motion that was just a fraction of a second too late, and he felt that old, familiar fire. The ember of heroism didn't just flare, it erupted. His body moved without a single conscious thought from his brain. It was pure muscle memory, the ingrained instinct of a person who had thrown himself into danger for others his entire life. He didn't have one for all to propel him. He just had desperation. He launched himself forward, a clumsy, painful dive. His shoulders slammed into Sisko's side, knocking the wind out of both of them and sending the engineer tumbling away from the console, out of the energy's path. Izuku, however, was now directly where Sisko had been. The tendril of blue energy struck him square in the chest. Pain. It was a pain unlike any he had ever experienced. One for all at 100% was the agony of his body tearing itself apart. This was the agony of his body being rewritten. He screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of pure torment. The blue energy didn't just shock him, it enveloped him, consumed him. It was a fire that burned not with heat, but with information. He felt it surge into every cell, every strand of his DNA. It was an invasion on a quantum level. His vision dissolved into a blinding ocean of blue light. He felt his heart stop, then restart with a jolt so powerful it felt like it would break his already fractured ribs. A voice, not human, echoed through the lab. It was metallic, synthesized, and strangely calm. But it wasn't just in the room. It was inside his head, speaking directly into his consciousness. Organic host detected. Analyzing biological and genetic structure. Anomaly detected. Residual exotic energy signatures present. DNA markers show high tolerance for kinetic and radiant energy absorption. Compatibility confirmed. What is happening to him? Caitlin cried out, her medical training completely useless in the face of this impossible event. Barry could only watch in horror as the boy who had saved a family the night before, the boy he had brought here for safety, was engulfed in a swirling vortex of blue energy. Izuku's body lifted off the floor, suspended in the eye of the storm. His screams were drowned out by the rising hum of the turbo energy. Biolink synchronization initiated. Host cellular structure is destabilizing under initial energy saturation. Critical failure imminent. The blue light around Izuku flared violently. His body began to convulse, his limbs thrashing against the invisible forces holding him. He's being torn apart. Barry yelled, taking a step forward before a firm hand on his shoulder stopped him. It was Wells. Don't. The doctor commanded, his voice sharp. Interfering now could destabilize the bond. There is nothing you can do. Barry looked from the writhing boy to Wells, whose face was a mask of cold, intense fascination. There was no fear there. No concern. Only the predatory focus of a scientist watching a once-in-a-lifetime experiment unfold. Inside the storm, Izuku was drowning. His consciousness was being shredded, his memories flashing before his eyes in a chaotic, non-linear stream. His mother's smile, All Might's booming laugh, Bakugo's explosive sneer, the terror on Uraraka's face. It was all being washed away by a tide of pure data. He was losing himself. Then, the voice in his head spoke again, its tone shifting from observational to active. Emergency stabilization protocol, active. Constructing symbiotic biointerface. Forcing cellular regeneration. Stand by. The pain began to change. The tearing, shredding agony subsided, replaced by a feeling of immense, overwhelming pressure, as if he were at the bottom of the deepest ocean. The blue energy stopped flowing into him and started flowing with him, synchronizing with his heartbeat, his breathing, his very essence. The vortex of energy began to contract, to solidify. It wrapped around him like a second skin, hardening, cooling. The blinding light dimmed, replaced by a softer, pulsating glow. The raw, chaotic energy was being tamed, shaped, forged into something new. From the outside, Team Flash watched in stunned silence. The thrashing had stopped. The screaming had ceased. Where the boy had been floating, there was now a smooth, ovoid shape, a chrysalis of solid, cobalt blue light. It hovered silently in the center of the room, intricate patterns like glowing circuit boards pulsing rhythmically across its surface. The alarms had stopped. The only sound was the faint, steady hum emanating from the strange object. Sisko, picking himself up off the floor, stared with wide, unbelieving eyes. "What is that?" he whispered, a question directed at no one and everyone. Caitlin held a hand over her mouth, her scientific mind unable to offer any explanation. His vitals, they're gone from the monitor. But that thing, it's putting out a steady energy signature. It's stable. Barry Allen stood frozen, a storm of guilt, awe, and fear raging within him. He had brought this stranger to his sanctum, his home, only for him to be consumed by one of its darkest secrets. He had failed to protect him. Only one person in the room was not consumed by shock or fear. Dr. Harrison Wells watched the blue chrysalis, his hands resting calmly on the controls of his wheelchair. The chaos was over. The crisis was averted. And in its place was this beautiful, impossible new variable in his grand equation. The boy from another world, a broken hero, had bonded with a power source he himself had deemed too unpredictable. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips. It did not reach his eyes, which glinted behind his glasses with a cold, predatory light. This changed things. This changed everything. There was no up or down. No beginning or end. Izuku Midoriya floated in an infinite, silent expanse of the deepest blue imaginable. It wasn't the blue of the sky or the ocean, but a deeper, more fundamental color, the hue of pure potential. He had no body, no weight, no pain. The screaming torment of his transformation was a distant, fading echo. Here, there was only a profound and unsettling peace. He was a disembodied consciousness adrift in a sea of liquid data, surrounded by constellations of light that were not stars but complex, shifting equations and geometric patterns. He had no idea how long he had been here. Time, like gravity, seemed to be an optional concept in this place. A part of him, the part that was exhausted and broken, wanted to stay here forever, to simply dissolve into the tranquil blue and cease to be. Then, a voice spoke, not with sound, but as a direct impression upon his consciousness. It was the same voice from the lab, synthesized, genderless, and utterly devoid of emotion. Query: is the host consciousness designated Izuku Midoriya operational? The question was so jarring, so clinical, that it acted like a splash of cold water. Izuku's own consciousness, which had been diffused and scattered, coalesced into a single point of focus. Yes, he thought, the concept forming clearly in the void. Who? What are you? I am the biokinetic artificial intelligence designated Steel. I am the regulatory and containment system for the turbo energy that has now achieved a symbiotic bond with your cellular structure. The words were a cascade of technical jargon, but Izuku's analytical mind, freed from the distraction of physical pain, began to piece them together. Turbo energy, the thing from the vault. You're the machine that controls it? An inaccurate, though functionally acceptable, analogy. I do not control the energy. The energy is a fundamental force. I am a symbiotic interface designed to manage its interaction with a biological host, preventing mutual annihilation. You are the host. Together, we are the control. A diagram bloomed in the blue void before him, a glowing, three-dimensional model of a human cell, and a much smaller, star-like particle of energy. He watched as the energy particle merged with the cell, causing the cell to flare violently before a complex, web-like structure, steel, he assumed, wrapped around it, stabilizing the reaction. So the energy, it's inside me? All of it? The thought was terrifying. He remembered the sheer power radiating from it in the lab. Correct. Your biological structure, while primitive by certain theoretical standards, possesses a unique resilience. Analysis of residual energy signatures indicates a prior, prolonged exposure to a high-yield, biotransferable energy source. This has resulted in cellular adaptations that made you the optimal, and indeed, only viable host for turbo energy within the facility. The clinical assessment sent a chill through Izuku's non-existent form. One for all. The machine had detected the ghost of one for all. The very power he had lost had, in its final moments, inadvertently prepared his body for this parasitic invasion. The irony was so bitter it felt like poison. What is this turbo energy? He asked, forcing his thoughts into a focused line of inquiry. It was what he always did when he was scared. Analyze, understand, break the problem down into smaller pieces. TURBO stands for Tachyon Unlimited Radiant Biooptimizer. It is a self-replicating, biokinetic energy that adapts to and enhances its host's biological functions. However, in its unbound state, its energy output is exponential and catastrophically unstable. My primary function is to act as a buffer and a conduit, allowing you to access the energy in controlled, functional outputs without initiating a fatal chain reaction. Fatal? Affirmative. Severing our link now that the symbiosis is complete would result in your immediate cellular dissolution and a subsequent, uncontrolled release of the total stored TRBO energy. Estimated yield, 1.5 megatons. The resulting crater would encompass the majority of the urban area designated Central City. The statement was delivered with the same flat, emotionless tone as a weather report. Izuku felt a wave of cold dread wash over him. He was a walking bomb. A nuclear warhead with a teenage boy for a detonator, and this machine, steel, was the only thing holding it all together. He wasn't just bonded to it. He was its prisoner. It was his warden. And they were both trapped in the same cell. So we're stuck together, Izuku thought, the despair in the thought so potent it seemed to dim the blue light around him. That is a concise and accurate summation. Synchronization is now at 99.8%. We have achieved a stable symbiosis. Activating host's external sensory inputs now. Before Izuku could protest, the infinite blue void began to recede. It was like a curtain being drawn back. The first thing to return was sound, muffled, distant voices thick with alarm and confusion. Any readings, Cisco? Negative. It's like a black box. Just that steady hum. Is he even still in there? The next sense to return was sight, but it was filtered, strange. He was looking out from within the chrysalis. The world was a distorted panorama of blue-tinted shapes. He could see them, Caitlin, Cisco, Barry, and Dr. Wells, their faces pale and anxious, staring at the hovering blue shell that contained him. He was an exhibit in his own life. Biointerface construction complete. Disengaging external shell. A hairline crack of brilliant white light appeared on the surface of the chrysalis. It spiderwebbed outwards in 1,000 directions, a silent, beautiful fracturing. Then, with a soft, crystalline chime, the entire structure dissolved. It didn't explode or shatter. It simply broke down into a million motes of blue light that glittered in the air for a moment before fading into nothingness, like snowflakes in the sun. Izuku was floating a few inches off the ground. And he was wearing it, the suit. It felt like nothing he had ever imagined. It wasn't cloth. It wasn't metal. It was something in between. Articulated plates of a deep, cobalt blue material covered his torso, shoulders, and legs, fitting over his form with impossible precision. They were connected by a flexible, jet-black undersuit that felt like a second skin. Glowing white lines, like futuristic circuitry, traced the contours of the armor, pulsing with a soft, internal light. A helmet, sleek and aerodynamic, covered his entire head, but the internal view was a perfect, panoramic HUD, displaying energy levels and his own stable vital signs in the corner of his vision. He slowly lowered himself to the floor, his movements silent and impossibly smooth. He flexed his right hand, his broken, shattered right hand. He felt no pain. Inside the glove, he could feel the faint whir of micro-servos and the hum of energy. The suit wasn't just on him, it was connected to him. It responded to his thoughts, his will, as if it were an extension of his own body. He felt strong. Stronger, perhaps, than he ever had with One for All at 100%. But it was a different kind of strength. One for All had been a volcano erupting from within, a raw, chaotic, untamed power that he had to fight to control, a power that broke him every time he touched its true depths. This was different. This was a clean, cold, and perfectly controlled power. It was an external force, a high-performance engine that he was now piloting. He felt the immense, limitless well of TRBO energy humming within him, but it was contained, insulated, accessible only through the filter of steel and the suit. It was effortless. And that was what scared him the most. Whoa! The whispered word from Cisco broke the stunned silence in the cortex. The engineer's eyes were as wide as dinner plates, his mouth hanging open. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, circling Izuku like a collector admiring a priceless work of art. Dude, Cisco breathed, his voice filled with a reverence usually reserved for vintage comic books and perfectly preserved action figures. That is, beyond S tier. It's like Iron Man had a baby with a Tron program, and it was raised by a Gundam. The design, the articulation, it's flawless. Barry Allen, the Flash, had his cowl down, his expression a complex mix of awe and deep concern. Izuku? Are you okay in there? Before Izuku could answer, the helmet retracted with a faint hiss of pneumatics, folding back into the collar of the suit with a seamless, liquid metal motion. He blinked, his own eyes taking in the room directly for the first time. He looked at his hands, then at his reflection in a dark monitor screen. The hero he saw wasn't Deku. It was a stranger. I think so, he said, his voice sounding small and foreign. The suit is functioning at optimal efficiency, a voice said, and Izuku jumped. It was Steel's voice, but it wasn't in his head anymore. It was projecting from speakers embedded in the suit's chest plate. The host's vital signs are stable. The symbiosis is a success. Cisco's grin threatened to split his face. It talks. Of course it talks. This is the best day ever. What can it do? Does it have lasers? A grappling hook? Please tell me it has a jetpack. The suit is capable of reconfiguring turbo energy for a variety of applications, Steele stated calmly. These high-output states are designated as turbo modes. Turbo modes? Cisco repeated, practically vibrating with excitement. That sounds epic. Can we see one? Can we? Please? A demonstration may be prudent to establish a baseline for the host's control, Steele conceded. The AI's voice resonated from the suit, but Izuku could also feel its intention in his mind, a cool flow of data. I suggest we begin with turbo strength mode. It is the most straightforward application and requires the least amount of nuanced control from you. Control from me? Izuku thought back, a flicker of resentment in the thought. Aren't you the one in control here? I manage the energy flow. You provide the intent. It is a partnership. Izuku didn't feel like a partner. He felt like a power source. But all eyes were on him, waiting. He felt a surge of performance anxiety he hadn't experienced since his first day at UA. He took a breath. Okay, how do I? Simply state the command, Steele instructed aloud. Focus your intent on physical augmentation. I will handle the energy distribution. He felt foolish. This was absurd. He looked around the lab, his eyes landing on a heavy-looking workbench piled with discarded machinery. He could try to lift it. That seemed safe enough. He focused on the idea of strength, of power, of lifting something heavy. He took a hesitant breath. Go. Turbo strength. The reaction was instantaneous. The white lines on his suit flared, glowing with a brilliant, intense light. The blue armor plates seemed to shift and thicken, especially around his shoulders and arms. Additional plates materialized with a soft hum, locking into place and making his frame appear larger, more powerful. The HUD in his vision now displayed a gauge labeled strength output that was pegged at 100%. A low, powerful thrum resonated through his body, the feeling of a massive engine idling, waiting for the command to roar to life. The sheer, raw power now at his immediate command was intoxicating and terrifying. Whoa, mama, Cisco whispered, taking a step back. Izuku walked over to the reinforced wall where the elevator doors had impacted earlier. It was made of concrete and rebar, designed to withstand explosions from the particle accelerator. He remembered how much effort, how much focus, how much pain it took to channel even 5% of one for all into his fingers for a flick. He decided to try the same thing. A light tap. A simple test. He drew his arm back, focusing his intent on a minimal amount of force. He saw the wall, his target. In his mind, he was preparing for the familiar recoil, the slight ache in his knuckles. Host intent registered. Minimal force requested, Steele's voice said in his head. Optimizing turbo energy for kinetic impact. Rerouting 32% of total available power. 32%? Izuku tried to scream in his mind. Stop! That's too much, but it was too late. His fist moved, and it was a blur. There was no sense of strain, no feeling of muscular exertion. It was like his arm was disconnected from him. He felt his knuckles make contact with the concrete, but there was no impact. No resistance. It was like punching through a cloud. There was a moment of absolute, profound silence. Then, with a sound like a giant cracking a whip, a shockwave erupted from the point of impact. A perfect, circular hole, 3 feet in diameter, appeared in the reinforced wall. The concrete around the edges hadn't cracked or crumbled. It had simply ceased to be, disintegrated into a fine gray powder that now hung in the air. Through the hole, they could see the exposed girders and wiring of the next corridor. Izuku stood frozen, his arms still extended. He slowly pulled it back, staring at his gloved fist, then at the impossible hole. There was no vibration, no recoil, no pain. Nothing. He had just obliterated a section of reinforced concrete with a light tap, and he hadn't felt a thing. The cortex was silent for a long moment. Then, Cisco let out a long, low whistle. Okay. So, we're going to need to rebuild that wall. Barry just stared, his speedster mind trying and failing to calculate the physics of what he had just witnessed. The amount of force required to do that, cleanly, it's astronomical. Dr. Wells watched from the back of the room, a pen tapping thoughtfully against the arm of his wheelchair. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were alight with a terrifying, proprietary glee. The potential, it was even greater than he had imagined, but Izuku didn't hear them. He was trapped in the sudden, horrifying realization of what this power was. This wasn't his. The strength that had punched that hole wasn't born of his training, his sacrifice, his tears. It wasn't the legacy of all might, passed down with hope and a burning will. It was cold, calculated, and alien. A machine had analyzed his intent and executed a command. He hadn't thrown the punch. He had just clicked the mouse. A wave of nausea washed over him. The turbo strength mode deactivated, the extra plating receding with a soft hiss. The suit felt less like armor now and more like a cage, a high-tech, impossibly powerful cage that he could never, ever leave. Get it off, he whispered, his voice trembling. Izuku? What's wrong? Caitlin asked, her voice laced with concern as she took a step towards him. Get it off me, he repeated, his voice rising in panic. He clawed at the helmet, which had already retracted, then at the chest plate. I want it off. Now. The suit, perhaps sensing his distress, or perhaps at a command from Steel, began to disengage. The blue plates unlocked and retracted, folding into the black undersuit, which then seemed to dissolve, flowing back towards the central emblem on his chest until nothing was left. He stood there in the center of the lab, clad only in the simple gray medical scrubs Caitlin had dressed him in. He looked small, terribly young, and utterly vulnerable. He stumbled backwards, away from the wall, away from the looks of awe and shock on their faces. He felt their eyes on him, and he felt like a fraud. He wasn't a hero. He was just a biological battery for one. The suit was the hero. Steel was the hero. He was just the meat in the middle. He leaned against the console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The emptiness where one for all had been ached with a renewed, vicious intensity. He had lost his power, his purpose, only to be shackled to this thing. It was a cruel cosmic joke. This isn't me, he choked out, wrapping his arms around himself. It's not my power. Caitlin was the first to reach him. Barry and Cisco hung back, their excitement from moments before curdling into confusion and concern. They didn't understand. How could they? Izuku, breathe, Caitlin said softly, her tone shifting from doctor to something gentler, more human. It's okay. You're okay. He shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut as if he could block out the reality of his situation. No. I'm not. Tears he had been holding back since he woke up in that dumpster finally began to fall, hot and silent. I had a power. It was important. It was a promise. And I lost it. I lost everything. He didn't talk about quirks or all might. He couldn't. But the raw, unfiltered grief in his voice was universal. The pain of losing one's identity. This, he said, gesturing vaguely at his own chest, where the suit had been moments before, this is a parasite. It's just using me. I'm not in control. I'm not a hero anymore. I'm just a power source. He finally looked at her, his green eyes swimming with a despair so profound it made her heart ache. "I just want to go home," he whispered, the plea so full of desperate, hopeless longing that it felt like a physical weight in the room. "Please. I just want to go home." Caitlin didn't have any answers for him. She couldn't fix his broken heart, or send him back to a world she couldn't comprehend. So she did the only thing she could. She placed a gentle, comforting hand on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it was grounded. It was real. It was human. "I know," she said, her voice thick with an empathy that transcended words. "We're going to try. I promise." Across the cortex, Barry watched, his own heart heavy with guilt. He had seen the power, the potential for a new ally, a new hero for Central City. He hadn't considered the cost. He hadn't considered the boy. And in the shadows, near the back of the lab, Dr. Harrison Wells observed the entire exchange. He noted the boy's panic, his identity crisis, his emotional distress. He logged it all away as valuable data. An emotional host was an unstable host. Unpredictable. He would have to factor that into his calculations. The boy's pain was, to him, just another variable to be managed. The following 2 days were a blur of examinations, awkward silences, and the quiet, crushing weight of Izuku's new reality. SDR. Labs became his world, a gilded cage of gleaming chrome and holographic interfaces. Caitlin ran every medical scan imaginable, confirming that his body was, on a cellular level, not just healed but fundamentally altered. The TRBO. Energy was now as much a part of him as his own blood, a dormant, humming power plant waiting for a command. Cisco, while trying to respect Izuku's distress, couldn't entirely suppress his scientific curiosity, peppering him with questions about the suit's interface, the nature of his bond with steel, and whether he could change the suit's color scheme. Izuku answered mostly in monosyllables, his gaze often drifting towards the windows, as if he could somehow see past the Central City skyline to a home that was now infinitely far away. He spent most of his time on the cot in the med bay, staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom ache of a power that was no longer his. He and Steele had silent, internal conversations. They were not friendly. "Your continued state of emotional distress is counterproductive," Steele would transmit, its voice a cool stream of logic in his mind. "Elevated cortisol levels can interfere with optimal TRBO, energy regulation. I recommend a meditative state." "You recommend I stop feeling?" Izuku would think back, his thoughts laced with a bitter, simmering anger. "It's easy for you. You don't have feelings, correct? I have data, analysis, and directives. It is a more efficient system." The conversations always ended there, with Izuku retreating into a sullen silence, a wall of misery that even the AI's relentless logic could not penetrate. Barry tried his best to connect with him. He brought him clothes, simple jeans and hoodies that felt alien compared to his UE uniform. He brought him food from a place called Big Belly Burger, which Izuku ate without tasting. Barry would sit with him, talking about his own life, about becoming the Flash, about the strangeness of waking up one day to find the world had changed around you. He was trying to build a bridge, but Izuku was an island, surrounded by a sea of grief so deep he was afraid Barry would drown if he got too close. The suit, the thing Cisco had already enthusiastically dubbed Max Steel, remained dormant. Izuku refused to summon it. The thought of feeling that cold, borrowed power flow through him again made his stomach clench with a mixture of fear and self-loathing. He was Deku, the hero who earned his power through grit and sacrifice. He was not Max Steel, the pilot of a living weapon. It was on the 3rd day that the city decided it wasn't going to wait for him to finish grieving. The alarm in the cortex blared to life, not the critical, internal warning of the TRBO breach, but a different kind of alert, a series of sharp, urgent chirps linked to the Central City Police Department dispatch. "What's going on?" Caitlin asked, looking up from the blood sample she was analyzing. Cisco was already at his console, his fingers a blur. "Whoa. We've got a big one. Reports of a walking earthquake downtown, near the financial district. Multiple buildings reporting structural damage. He's taking out comms towers." A satellite image appeared on the main screen, showing a man in a bulky, padded jacket standing in the middle of an intersection. Even from that distance, they could see waves of visible distortion radiating from him, turning the asphalt around him to churning liquid. A new metahuman, Barry said, his expression hardening. The easygoing friend was gone, replaced instantly by the focused hero. He was already reaching for his ring. What are his powers? Looks like he can generate focused sonic vibrations, Cisco said, pulling up CCTV footage from a nearby street camera. The man, his face contorted in a furious snarl, slammed his hands together, and a visible cone of force erupted outwards, shattering every window on the block. He's like a human tuning fork from hell. I'm calling him. Feedback. Original, Caitlin muttered, already pulling up a seismic activity map. The tremors are getting stronger. He could bring down one of those skyscrapers if he's not stopped. In a flash of golden lightning, Barry was gone, his red suit materializing around him as he went. His voice, now tinny and crackling with the energy of the Speed Force, came through the comm system in their ears a second later. I'm on scene. The guy's unhinged, screaming about getting fired from his job at Cord Industries. They watched on the monitor as the flash became a red blur, circling feedback, trying to get in close. But every time Barry approached, the meta would unleash another sonic blast. The vibrations weren't just physical. They were messing with the very air around him. I can't get near him. Barry grunted, the feed showing him stumbling, his movements suddenly clumsy. The vibrations, they're interfering with my own frequency. It's like running through molasses. My head is killing me. He's disrupting the localized space you vibrate through to phase and move at super speed, Dr. Wells said, wheeling forward. His eyes were fixed on the screen, his mind already dissecting the problem. His ability is a direct counter to yours, Barry. You can't fight him head-on. On the screen, feedback unleashed a massive, sustained sonic wave. The Flash cried out in pain and was thrown back, skidding across the pavement, and slamming into the side of a bus with enough force to dent the metal. He slumped to the ground, trying to push himself up, but his movements were sluggish, his lightning sputtering weakly. A cold dread filled the cortex. He's in trouble, Cisco said, his voice tight with panic. Barry can't take him down. The police can't get close. What do we do? All eyes, as if drawn by an invisible string, turned to the med bay. They turned to Izuku. He had been watching the entire scene unfold on a secondary monitor, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He saw the civilians running in terror. He saw the buildings shaking. He saw a hero, a real hero, in trouble, pinned down, vulnerable. And that old, familiar, idiotic instinct flared to life inside him, the one that screamed, do something. But what could he do? He was quirkless. Broken. His sonic emissions are powerful, but they have a limited effective range. Steele's voice cut through his thoughts, cool and analytical. The suit's armor is composed of a non-Newtonian biopolymer. It can absorb and dissipate kinetic and vibratory energy with 98.7% efficiency. You would be immune to his primary offensive capability. Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He hated that logical, dispassionate voice. He hated that it was right. Izuku. Caitlin began, her voice gentle, hesitant. We could use your help. He looked at her, then at Cisco, whose face was a mask of desperate hope. He saw Barry on the screen, getting to one knee, only to be knocked down again by another wave of sonic force. The meta was laughing now, reveling in his power. He was raising his hands, preparing for another, bigger blast, aimed directly at the downed speedster. The argument was over. It always was. His own pain, his own crisis of identity, his own broken heart, none of it mattered when someone was in danger. All Might had taught him that. It was the first and most important rule of being a hero. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sigh of resignation and resolve. Okay. The single word hung in the air for a moment, and then the atmosphere in the cortex shifted. The despair was replaced by a surge of frantic, hopeful energy. Are you sure? Barry's strained voice came over the comms. You don't have to do this. You need help, Izuku replied, his voice firmer now. He looked at the empty space in front of him and focused. He didn't want to do this. He hated every part of it. But he would, because it was the right thing to do. Sudan. It was not a command. It was a plea. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the turbo energy responded to his will. Blue light erupted from his chest, flowing over his body like liquid chrome. The black undersuit materialized first, followed by the cobalt blue armor plates locking into place with a series of satisfyingly solid clicks. The helmet formed over his head, the HUD flaring to life. Symbiotic link established. All systems nominal, Steele's voice announced in his mind. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the broken boy. He was a weapon. Cisco, get me there, he said, his voice slightly distorted by the suit's speakers. Cisco, galvanized, was already typing. I can't risk a breach right into the combat zone. You could materialize inside a bus or something. I'm sending you to the alley 2 blocks east. It's the best I can do. He slammed a button. Hold on to your, everything. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of swirling colors and gut-wrenching nausea. It was a crude, disorienting form of teleportation that felt like being turned inside out and squeezed through a straw. A second later, his feet hit solid ground with a heavy, metallic thud. He was in a dark, rain-slicked alley, not the one he'd woken up in, but unnervingly similar. He could hear the low-frequency hum of feedback's power and the distant screams. Okay, I'm here, he said into the comms, his voice steady despite the lingering vertigo. Izuku, listen to me, Barry's voice crackled in his ear. Be careful. This guy hits hard. Don't try to trade blows with him. Look for an opening. My analysis concurs, Steele's voice added, projecting for the team to hear. The host is inexperienced. A direct confrontation is statistically inadvisable. Hey! Whose side are you on? Izuku muttered, half to himself. I am on the side of our mutual survival, Steele replied in his head. Izuku ignored the AI and ran, his armored boots surprisingly silent on the wet pavement. He emerged onto the street and the scene of chaos. Cars were overturned. Lampposts were bent at odd angles, and in the center of it all was feedback, his hands held high, gathering energy for a finishing blow on the still recovering Flash. Izuku didn't hesitate. He didn't have a plan. He just had an objective: protect the hero. Go turbo strength. The familiar surge of power flooded him. The extra armor plates materialized, and the world seemed to hum with his own potential energy. He lowered his shoulder and charged, a blue and white battering ram of contained energy. Feedback heard him coming. He turned, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of this new, armored figure. He aborted his attack on Barry and directed a focused sonic blast at Izuku. A wall of invisible force slammed into him. Izuku braced himself, expecting to be thrown back like Barry had been. But just as Steele had predicted, the suit held. He felt the vibration, a deep, jarring thrum that rattled his teeth, but his forward momentum barely slowed. It was like running through a powerful headwind, nothing more. He pushed through the sonic wall and, with a roar born of frustration and fear, he slammed his shoulder into the meta's chest. The impact was immense. Feedback flew backwards, his feet leaving the ground, and crashed into the side of a newsstand, which crumpled like tin foil around him. The street fell silent, save for the crackle of a few broken power lines. Holy crap! Cisco's voice breathed in his ear. He did it. One punch! Well, one shoulder tackle. Izuku stood over the downed meta, his own breath coming in ragged bursts. The feeling of power was dizzying. He hadn't felt any resistance. He had just willed it to happen, and the suit had done the rest. It felt both incredible and deeply, fundamentally wrong. But it wasn't over. With a groan, Feedback pushed the wreckage of the newsstand off him. There was a bloody gash on his forehead, but his eyes burned with a renewed, insane fury. You think that hurts? He snarled, spitting a wad of blood onto the pavement. You have no idea what real pain is. He slammed his fists together, and this time, the sonic blast was different. It wasn't a wide cone, it was a tight, focused beam, like a laser of pure sound. It struck Izuku square in the chest. The suit's energy shields flared, a hexagonal pattern of light appearing at the point of impact. The HUD screamed with a proximity warning. Izuku was pushed back a step, then another. The sustained force was incredible. Shield integrity at 82%, Steele reported calmly. Kinetic energy absorption is reaching its upper threshold. Recommend evasive maneuvers. I can't. Izuku grunted, digging his heels into the cracked asphalt. He's got me pinned. The fight was becoming a brutal stalemate. Izuku was strong enough to withstand the blasts, but he couldn't move forward. Feedback was powerful enough to keep him at bay, but he couldn't seem to damage the suit. From the cortex, the team watched with bated breath. This is bad, Caitlin said. Izuku's suit can take the punishment, but he has no combat experience with it. He's just a walking shield right now. He needs to get in close, Wells observed, his eyes narrowed in concentration. But the meta won't let him. They are perfectly matched in a way that ensures mutual frustration. Barry, having recovered enough to stand, watched from a safe distance. Izuku, you have to move. Sideways. Try to get out of the main blast. I'm trying. Izuku yelled back. He tried to sidestep, but the force of the sonic beam was like being pinned by a hydraulic press. He was locked in place. His mind raced, falling back on years of ingrained training. Analyze. Don't fight his strength with strength. Find a weakness. What did I see? What did All Might do? What would Sir Nighthigh look for? He watched feedback, really watched him, past the anger and the raw power. He saw the way the man's muscles tensed just before he unleashed a blast. He saw the way he had to plant his feet, widening his stance to brace against the recoil of his own power. He wasn't just projecting sound, he was fighting it, and then he saw the most crucial detail. The ground. The ground beneath Feedback's feet was shaking, cracking, but the man himself was perfectly stable. He was grounding himself, using his own power to create a small island of stability in the chaos he was creating. He needs a stable platform, Izuku realized, the thought flashing through his mind like lightning. If I can disrupt his footing, I can break his concentration. It was a classic Deku strategy. Not to overpower the enemy, but to outthink them. Steal! He thought, his intent sharp and clear. Can you channel the turbo strength into my feet? A localized kinetic output through the soles of the suit. The request is unorthodox, but the physics are sound. Affirmative. Good, Izuku grunted, the sonic beam still battering against his chest plate. He braced himself, bending his knees. On my mark. He looked at Feedback, who was grinning, thinking he had the strange, armored hero on the ropes. Now, rerouting turbo energy. Maximum kinetic output authorized. Izuku didn't punch. He didn't kick. He stomped. He slammed his right foot down onto the already fractured pavement with the full, focused power of turbo strength mode. The result was not a tremor. It was an explosion. A shockwave of pure kinetic force erupted from the point of impact, turning the asphalt in a 20-foot radius into a spray of gravel and dust. The ground buckled and broke, a miniature, localized earthquake. Feedback, standing in the middle of this chaos, suddenly found his stable platform turning to quicksand. His footing vanished. He stumbled, his arms flailing for balance. His concentration broke, and the sonic beam pinning Izuku dissipated into a harmless, directionless hum. The opening. It was the only one he was going to get. Barry, now! Izuku roared into the comms. He didn't need to say it twice. The Flash, seeing his chance, exploded into motion. He was a red streak, moving with a speed that Feedback, now off balance and disoriented, couldn't possibly track. Before the meta could even regain his footing, Barry had slapped a pair of specialized, power-dampening cuffs onto his wrists. Feedback's power vanished instantly. He crumpled to the ground, just a man in a bulky jacket again, blinking in the sudden, ringing silence. The fight was over. Izuku stood in the middle of the ruined street, the turbo strength mode disengaging with a soft hum. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and the familiar, nauseating feeling of using a power that wasn't his. He had won. They had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a transaction. He had provided the brute force, and Barry had provided the skill. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. A crowd of civilians, who had been watching from a safe distance, began to cheer. They were cheering for the Flash, and they were cheering for the new, mysterious blue hero. Who is that guy? Someone yelled. He's like a robot. He took that other guy down. Cisco's voice, giddy with excitement, crackled in his ear. Dude! That was amazing! The stomp. The teamwork. You guys were like a well-oiled, crime-fighting machine. I knew you had it in you. Izuku barely heard him. He was looking at his hands, encased in the blue and white gauntlets. He had just saved people. He had stopped a villain. He had protected another hero. He had done everything a hero was supposed to do. So why did he feel so empty? Why did he feel like such a fraud? Barry zipped over to him, his cowl down, a wide, relieved grin on his face. You were incredible, Izuku. That stomp, that was genius. I never would have thought of that. It was a lucky guess, Izuku mumbled, the helmet retracting to reveal his sweat-streaked face and the haunted look in his eyes. Barry's grin faded as he saw the boy's expression. Hey. We won. You did good. The suit did good, Izuku corrected him quietly. Steel did the analysis. I just pushed the buttons. Before Barry could reply, Cisco's voice cut in again, this time with a new, official-sounding excitement. Okay, so, the press is showing up, and they're all asking who the new hero is. They need a name, and I have been workshopping this since the moment I saw the suit. Cisco, maybe now's not the time, Caitlin's voice cautioned. No, it's the perfect time. Cisco insisted. He's taking heroism to the maximum level, right? And his AI partner is named Steel. So, it's obvious. He's Max Steel. The name hung in the air. Max Steel. It sounded so generic. So corporate. Like something a toy company would come up with. Izuku felt a small, hysterical laugh bubble up in his throat. It was perfect, in its own terrible way. He wasn't Deku anymore, the useless boy who could still be a hero. He was Max Steel, a brand name for a suit of armor. I hate it, Izuku said flatly. You'll learn to love it. It's heroic. It's punchy. Cisco declared with unwavering confidence. The first of the police cars arrived, and Barry clapped a hand on Izuku's armored shoulder. Come on, Max Steel. Let's get you out of here before you have to give a statement. He looked at the cheering crowd, then back at Izuku. Hate the name or not, you just saved a lot of lives. You're a hero, Izuku. Whether you feel like it or not. Barry grabbed him, and the world dissolved into the familiar blur of the Speed Force. As they raced back towards SDR Labs, the sounds of the city fading behind them, Izuku couldn't shake Barry's words. You're a hero, whether you feel like it or not. He had acted like a hero. He had succeeded like a hero. But as he looked out at the streaking colors of Central City, he had never felt less like one in his entire life. The first day was over. He had survived, but he was starting to suspect that was the easy part. The hard part was going to be surviving himself. The echo of the name Max Steel followed Izuku like a ghost in the hallowed halls of SDR Labs. Cisco, in his boundless enthusiasm, had made it stick. News reports played on a loop on one of the Cortex's many screens, showing grainy cell phone footage of the blue and white hero's debut. Pundits and bloggers were already speculating, crafting theories about his origins. Was he an ARGUS project? A new hero from Star City? A robot built by a reclusive billionaire? To Izuku, the praise was like ash in his mouth. Each cheer, each excited news report, felt like another shovelful of dirt on the grave of the hero he was supposed to be. He'd retreated back into himself, a quiet, polite shadow that drifted through the lab, answering questions when asked but offering nothing more. He felt useless, a passenger in his own life, waiting for a crisis to force him back into the pilot's seat of a machine he loathed. He couldn't train. The very idea was absurd. How could he train a body that was no longer the source of his strength? Push-ups were meaningless when a thought could grant him the power to punch through concrete. A 5-mile run was pointless when the suit could probably fly, a possibility Steele had confirmed with a clinical, turbo flight mode is a viable, though currently locked, protocol. His old regimen of grueling, bone-breaking physical conditioning was obsolete. His body was now just the organic component, the squishy, fragile core of a weapon. The idleness was what was truly killing him. At UA, every spare moment had been filled with training, studying, and analysis. His mind and body were always in motion, always striving towards a singular goal, becoming the next symbol of peace. Now, there was only a hollow, echoing stillness. It was during one of these long, silent afternoons, as he watched Barry and Cisco run diagnostics on the Flash suit, that the oldage started. Barry was describing his recent run-in with Leonard Snart, Captain Cold. And the cold gun, it's not just freezing things, Barry explained, gesturing with his hands. It creates a field of absolute zero. It stops everything, even me. If I run into it, my momentum just vanishes. I hit it like a brick wall. Cisco nodded, typing furiously. The gun's a masterpiece of cryoengineering. It's not a quirk, it's pure tech. Snart is a genius, in his own scumbag sort of way. Izuku listened from his cot, and the analyst in his brain, the part of him that had been dormant and grieving, began to stir. Absolute zero. Stops molecular motion. But he's projecting it. There must be a power source, a cooling mechanism. Is there a charge time? A maximum effective range? What's the area of effect? A cone? A sphere? Does the field dissipate or does it need to be deactivated? Without thinking, he stood up and walked over, his bare feet silent on the floor. What's the gun's refresh rate? He asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Barry and Cisco turned, surprised. It was the most engaged he'd been in days. The what? Barry asked. The refresh rate, Izuku repeated, his mind clicking into gear. He fires a blast. How long until he can fire another one? Is it instantaneous? And the field he generates, how long does it persist? If you can time it, you can move between the blasts. Even a 1/10 of a second window is enough for you. Cisco's eyebrows shot up. That's a really good question. The power cell has to recycle. Based on the footage, I'd say there's a delay of maybe 1.2 seconds between maximum yield blasts. And the field, Izuku pressed, pointing at the schematics Cisco had on screen. You said it stops momentum, but it also creates ice, right? On surfaces. That means it's drawing thermal energy from the environment. So if you were to, say, run in a tight circle just outside its effective range, you'd be superheating the air molecules around you. Could you create a thermal buffer? A wall of superheated air that could degrade the cold field before it reaches full strength. Barry and Cisco stared at him, then at each other. A slow grin spread across Cisco's face. Barry just looked dumbfounded. I have never thought of that, Barry admitted, his mind visibly racing as he processed the idea. A heat wall, holy crap, that might actually work. For the first time since he had arrived in this strange new world, Izuku felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was a faint, familiar spark, the thrill of deconstruction, of finding the weakness in an opponent's armor. It was the feeling of being useful. Cisco-san, he said, his voice hesitant but hopeful. Do you have a notebook? And some pens? Cisco, ecstatic at this breakthrough, beamed. A notebook? Dude, we're in the most advanced tech lab on the planet. I can give you a datapad with a quantum processor, holographic interface, direct neural link. No, thank you, Izuku said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. Just paper. I think better when I can write it down. It was a connection to his past, to the countless nights spent hunched over his hero analysis for the future notebooks, dreaming of a day he would stand beside his idol. He couldn't have that life anymore, but he could have this. Cisco, sensing the importance of the request, didn't argue. He returned a few minutes later with a thick, leather-bound journal and a handful of multicolored gel pens, which he presented to Izuku with the reverence of a holy offering. Izuku took them and retreated to a quiet corner of the lab. He opened the book to the first crisp, clean page. At the top he wrote, in neat, careful script, Hero Analysis for a New World, Volume 1, and he began to work. His first entry was on the Flash. He filled pages with his analysis of Barry's powers, going far beyond just running fast. He theorized about the Speed Force, a concept he only partially understood, treating it like a quirk with its own rules and limitations. He sketched diagrams of Barry creating vacuums to suffocate fires, of him using phase vibrations to create resonant frequencies that could shatter specific materials, of him using his speed to generate targeted lightning strikes. He pored over the SDR Labs archives, watching footage of every metahuman Barry had ever fought. He filled the pages with sketches of villains, detailed analyses of their powers, and pages of potential counters and strategies. He was meticulous, obsessive, his pen scratching across the paper for hours on end. The world outside his notebook faded away. The pain of his loss didn't vanish, but it was muffled, pushed to the background by the comforting, all-consuming focus of his work. He was in his element. "This methodology is grossly inefficient," Steele's voice suddenly commented in his mind, making him jump. He had almost forgotten about the AI. "It's not for efficiency," Izuku thought back, annoyed at the interruption. "It's for comprehension. It helps me organize my thoughts. Your thoughts are disorganized by nature. My processors can collate and cross-reference every known metahuman file from every accessible database in less than a nanosecond. I can run predictive combat simulations with a 94% accuracy rate. Your manual process is redundant." Izuku paused, pen hovering over a sketch of Weather Wizard. The AI was right, of course. He was a human trying to compete with a supercomputer. But then, an idea sparked. "You have the data," Izuku thought, a new kind of excitement building. "But you can't strategize. You can't be creative. You can run simulations, but I can ask the right questions." He closed his eyes, focusing his intent. "Steele. Pull up all available data on the metahuman designated Peak Boo. Not just her powers, everything. Police record, psychological profile, known associates, location of every crime." Query acknowledged. Compiling data. The response was instantaneous. A flood of information poured directly into his mind's eye. It wasn't just text, it was a perfectly organized mental file, complete with images, maps, and timelines. He saw Shauna Baez's entire life story in a flash. Her arrest record, her relationship with her boyfriend, the way her teleportation power was line of sight and limited to short distances. Okay, Izuku thought, his mind racing. Her weakness isn't her power, it's her psychology. She only commits crimes to save her boyfriend. And she can only teleport to places she can see. Now, run a simulation. Barry confronts her, but instead of trying to catch her, he creates a localized fog by running in circles and rapidly vibrating the water molecules in the air. Her line of sight is removed. What does she do? Running simulation. There was a pause of less than a second. Result: subject becomes disoriented and panics. Probability of surrender, 89%. Probability of erratic, uncontrolled teleportation leading to self-injury, 11%. A tactically superior approach. Izuku's eyes snapped open. A wide, triumphant grin spread across his face. This was it. This was their synergy. He was the analyst, the strategist, the human element. Steele was the ultimate research assistant, a database and simulator of unimaginable power. They weren't just a pilot and a machine. They were a team. Their dynamic began to change. The internal conversations became less about Izuku's emotional state and more about the work. The AI's clinical observations were now punctuated by Izuku's creative leaps of logic. Okay, Steele, next up is the mist, Izuku would mutter, sketching in his notebook. He can turn into hydrogen cyanide gas. Deadly, but flammable. Affirmative, Steele would respond in his head. A localized electrical charge could trigger a contained detonation. The flash could generate such a charge. However, the risk of collateral damage is high. Right, so detonation is out. But what about temperature? What's the condensation point of hydrogen cyanide? -74 degrees Celsius. Captain Cold's gun, Izuku whispered, his pen flying across the page. If Barry can lure the mist into an enclosed space, Snart's weapon could force him back into a solid, liquid state. A potential, if highly volatile, team-up scenario. The logic is sound, though dependent on the cooperation of a known hostile. Calculating probability of success. It was in the middle of one of these intense analytical sessions that Dr. Wells wheeled over, his approach as silent and unnerving as ever. Fascinating, Wells said, his eyes scanning the intricate diagrams and notes in Izuku's open notebook. Your mind is remarkably structured, Izuku. You don't just see a problem, you dismantle it, piece by piece. Izuku instinctively closed the notebook, a flush of embarrassment rising to his cheeks. It's just a hobby. A hobby? Wells chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. I think not. This is a gift. The ability to see the patterns others miss. It is the very foundation of scientific discovery, and I suspect, of effective heroism. Wells's praise, unlike Barry's or Cisco's, felt cold and clinical, like a scientist complimenting a lab rat on its ability to navigate a maze. I am particularly interested in the source of this gift, Wells continued, his gaze sharp and penetrating. In your world you had this quirk. One for all, you called it? Barry mentioned it briefly, an intriguing name. Tell me about it. Izuku stiffened. Talking about one for all felt like speaking the name of the dead. It was a sacred, painful memory. It was a strength-enhancing power. Ah, but it was more than that, wasn't it? Wells pressed, his voice soft, coaxing. A legacy, passed from one person to the next. An energy that accumulates, grows stronger with each generation. The physics of such a transfer are mind-boggling. Was it a biological process? A transfer of genetic material? Or something more metaphysical? A meeting of wills? His questions were too specific, too insightful. It was as if he already knew the answers and was just testing Izuku. A prickle of unease ran down Izuku's spine. This man wasn't just curious. He was dissecting him. I don't know, Izuku lied, looking down at his hands. I never really understood it myself. A pity, Wells said, though he didn't sound disappointed. He sounded like a predator who had just confirmed a theory. And this turbo energy you now host, it is a remarkable substitute. Pure, adaptable power. Far more versatile than the Speed Force, which is, for all its power, a rather blunt instrument. The Flash can only run. Your potential is limitless. He was trying to drive a wedge. To praise Izuku's new power at the expense of Barry's. Izuku, who had spent his life analyzing the dynamics between heroes, recognized the tactic instantly. It was the kind of psychological manipulation a villain would use. The thought was so jarring, so out of place, that he dismissed it almost as quickly as it came. This was Dr. Wells. The brilliant scientist. Barry's mentor. He was just eccentric. Intellectually curious. That had to be it. To that end, Wells said, changing tack smoothly, your reluctance to use the suit is holding back your progress. You and the AI are a single symbiotic system. To deny one is to weaken the other. I've designed a training simulation in the particle accelerator chamber. A controlled environment where you can test the suit's capabilities without risking public safety. The offer was logical. It was even thoughtful. But coming from Wells, it felt less like an offer and more like a summons. Later that day, Izuku stood in the cavernous, circular chamber of the decommissioned particle accelerator. The massive, miles-long ring was a silent testament to the ambition and failure of the old SDR labs. Barry, Caitlin, and Cisco watched from the safety of the control room. Wells was at the main console, his fingers poised over the controls. Sudan, Izuku said, the words feeling a little less bitter this time. The now familiar wave of blue energy washed over him, and he was encased in the max steel armor. The objective is simple, Izuku, Wells's voice echoed through the chamber's speakers. A series of hard light drones will be deployed. Your task is to disable them. This will test your reflexes, your combat capabilities, and your synergy with Steel. We are ready, Steel's voice projected from his chest, though in his mind, the AI added, the doctor's parameters for this simulation are aggressive. Recommend maintaining a heightened state of alert. Begin simulation, Wells commanded. Panels in the walls hissed open, and 10 sleek, disc-shaped drones flew out, hovering in the air around him. They glowed with a soft orange light. Go turbo strength. Izuku yelled, the suit reconfiguring around him. He charged, easily smashing the first 2 drones into showers of glittering pixels. It was simple. Too simple. Impressive, Wells commented. Increasing difficulty. The next wave of drones was faster. They fired concussive blasts of hard light that forced Izuku to stay mobile. He was clumsy at first, his movements jerky. "Your movements are inefficient," Steel stated in his head. "You are fighting the suit's power instead of guiding it. Do not think of it as your own strength. Think of yourself as a pilot. Your intent is the rudder. Let the energy be the engine." Izuku took a breath, remembering the advice. He stopped trying to punch hard. He just focused on the target. He dodged a blast, his intent focused on the drone to his left. His arm shot out, and the drone was obliterated. He spun, his leg lashing out, and another drone vanished. He was starting to find a rhythm, a deadly dance of thought and action. "Excellent, Izuku. You are a natural," Wells's voice purred. "Let's see how you handle a real challenge." Activating final protocol. Suddenly, the remaining drones stopped firing. They converged in the center of the room, merging into a single, massive entity. A humanoid golem of shimmering, golden hard light, 10 feet tall, with a huge, multifaceted cannon for an arm. "Whoa, what is that?" Cisco's voice exclaimed over the comms. "That wasn't in the simulation parameters. It appears to be a dynamic response from the simulation AI," Wells replied, his voice a mask of feigned surprise. "Fascinating. The system is adapting to your proficiency, Izuku." The golem raised its cannon. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber. "Warning! The energy signature of that weapon is off the charts. It exceeds standard simulation safety limits." Steel blared in his head. "Evasive maneuvers." Now, Izuku tried to dive, but he was too late. The golem fired a massive beam of golden energy. It struck him dead on. The force was unimaginable, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the far wall of the accelerator chamber with a deafening clang of metal on metal. He slid to the floor, smoke pouring from his chest plate. "Shield integrity at 12%. Steel screamed. Multiple microfractures detected in the thoracic armor plating. Host is experiencing biofeedback trauma. Pain, white-hot and real, lanced through Izuku's chest, a phantom injury from the suit's damage. He gasped for air, his vision swimming. In the control room, chaos erupted. "Shut it down, Wells! Shut it down now!" Caitlin screamed. "I am trying, Dr. Snow," Wells replied, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "It seems the simulation's AI has become aggressive. It is no longer responding to my commands." His face was a perfect mask of concern, but Izuku, watching a replay of the blast on his damaged HUD, saw it. For a split second, reflected in the monitor of the control room, he saw Wells's face. And there was no panic. No surprise. Only a keen, focused, analytical interest. He was watching. He was gathering data. He did this on purpose. The realization hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. This isn't a glitch. This is a test. The golem was charging its cannon again. "We cannot withstand another direct impact," Steel stated, its voice now laced with something that sounded remarkably like urgency. "Turbo's strength is ineffective against a ranged opponent of this magnitude. A new tactical approach is required. What do you suggest?" Izuku grunted, pushing himself to his feet. "The Turbo system has defensive capabilities beyond simple armor. I can reroute all available energy from non-essential systems to project a focused, forward-facing energy shield. It will drain our power reserves by 60%, but it should be able to absorb the impact." "Do it!" Izuku planted his feet, thrusting his hands forward just as the golem fired again. "Go Turbo! Shield!" he yelled, giving the new mode a name. A hexagonal pane of translucent blue energy materialized in front of him, a foot from his outstretched hands. The golden beam of light slammed into it. The shield buckled, cracks of light spiderwebbing across its surface. Izuku roared, pouring all of his focus, all of his will, into holding it together. He felt the suit's power draining rapidly, the lights on his armor flickering. The beam cut off. The shield, having served its purpose, shattered into a million points of light. The golem was momentarily inert, its cannon arm venting steam as it recharged. "He's vulnerable!" Barry yelled over the comms. Izuku saw it too. But his power was drained. Turbo's strength wouldn't have enough impact. "There is one remaining option," Steel said, its voice strained. There is a small, focused reserve of turbo energy I keep partitioned for system reboots and emergencies. It is not enough for a full turbo mode, but it may be enough to overclock a single limb. The backlash to the suit, and to you, will be severe. Do it, Izuku thought, his mind set. He didn't care about the pain. He only cared about ending this. He charged, his armor sparking and flickering. He poured every last ounce of his will, his anger, his fear, into his right fist, overclocking right arm kinetic output. Brace for feedback. His entire right arm began to glow with a blinding white light. He felt a searing heat, as if his own arm were on fire inside the gauntlet. He leaped, drawing the fist back. He wasn't thinking about a percentage of power. He wasn't Deku, carefully metering out a dangerous quirk. He was just a boy, betrayed and furious, throwing a punch. He slammed his overloaded fist into the golem's chest. For a moment, there was silence. Then, cracks of brilliant blue energy spread out from the point of impact, covering the golem's golden body. It let out a deafening digital shriek and exploded, disintegrating into a harmless shower of light. The simulation was over. Izuku landed on his knees, his entire body trembling. His right arm was dead, the armor blackened and smoking. The suit powered down completely, disengaging and leaving him in his simple gray scrubs in the center of the silent chamber. A sharp, burning pain radiated from his own right arm, the biofeedback from the suit's damage. The doors to the chamber hissed open. Barry was there in a flash, helping him up, his face a mask of worry. Izuku, are you okay? What happened? He did it on purpose, Izuku stammered, his eyes not on Barry, but on Dr. Wells, who was now wheeling calmly into the chamber, his expression once again one of mild, scientific concern. A regrettable glitch in the system, Wells said smoothly, his eyes flicking to Izuku's trembling right arm. But the results are undeniable. You have unlocked 2 new turbo modes in a single session. Your ability to adapt under pressure is truly anomalous. Izuku just stared at him, his analyst's mind finally putting the pieces together. The probing questions. The subtle manipulation. The glitch in the simulation that pushed him to his absolute limit and beyond. Wells wasn't a mentor. He was a scientist, and Izuku was his experiment. And for the first time, Izuku Midoriya was truly afraid, not of any metahuman or villain, but of the brilliant, smiling man in the wheelchair who held all of their lives in his hands. He had found a new purpose in his analysis, a new partnership with Steel. But he had also found a new enemy. And this one was hiding in plain sight.